It neatly captures the bind we are in. The government today promised one of the largest public sector pay rises in recent history, which actually turns out to be a real terms pay cut.
Today's offer is final. There will be no more talks on pay. We will not negotiate again on this year's settlements, and no amount of strikes will change our decision.
So where does it leave this vexed question? And will the unions accept it? Also on News at 10 tonight. Risking national security, a damning new report on the government's response to Chinese espionage. All out. Some of Hollywood's biggest stars join writers on strike, so will the entertainment giants finally accept terms? Searingly hot and about to get hotter still. A special report from Spain on Europe's punishing heatwave.
If the temperatures go up too much, it won't be impossible to be here at any time.
And seeing is believing. Or is it how AI could change everything we thought we knew about the evidence before our eyes?
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Let's do something we perhaps don't manage as often as we'd like here on News at 10 to kick off the programme with what seems like good news, at least for school children in England and their parents. The long-running teachers' strike, which has caused so much disruption, could soon be over. As part of its announcement on public sector pay, the government has approved a fully funded 6.5% rise, which the 4 teaching unions are going to recommend to their members. It won't mean head teachers having to find savings to afford it. But less happily, there is no sign of an end to the doctors' strike in England as junior doctors began their 5-day walkout. They are rejecting 6% plus a £1,200 additional increase. More on them in a moment. The Prime Minister, though, made clear to the public service unions that today's offers were final. There will be no more talks on pay, Mr. Sunak said.
They're on strike, junior doctors. They've been on strike, teachers. Part of a public service, including the police and the military, who feel underappreciated and underpaid. Though today the Prime Minister announced that on average they'll get pay rises of 6.5%.
I can confirm today that we are accepting the headline recommendations of the pay review bodies in full. But we will not fund them by borrowing more or increasing your taxes.
Which means that these vital public services will have to make savings. That's cuts to you and me.
That means government departments have had to find savings and efficiencies elsewhere in order to prioritise paying public sector workers more.
Consultants, GPs and dentists are to get 6%, as will junior doctors, who also receive a permanent £1,250 rise. Teachers will receive 6.5%. Police and prison officers, 7%. The military, 5%, with an additional permanent £1,000, which is all very well, except that private sector workers are currently receiving 7.7% rises on average. How challenging will it be for departments to make the savings to pay for the pay rises?
The additional costs for public sector employers could be as much as £5 billion or so. Some of that might be offset through additional revenue sources, but it's going to pose some extremely difficult questions about savings that need to be found elsewhere, perhaps cuts to the size of the workforce, and public sector leaders will have a very difficult job on their hands making the sums add up in light of today's announcement.
About £1 billion of new money will come from increased visa and health service use charges for immigrants. But for the NHS, that may not be enough.
We need to look at this extremely carefully. And I think at this stage we are sceptical that this will bring in enough money to close that gap.
There was a take it or leave it from the Prime Minister.
Today's offer is final. There will be no more talks on pay. We will not negotiate again on this year's settlements, and no amount of strikes will change our decision.
And this head teacher in Huddersfield watched as Rishi Sunak revealed one bit of good news.
All teaching unions have just announced that they're suspending all planned strikes immediately.
Great news.
Teachers will return to the class.
Obviously, as a head teacher, I'm thrilled that my staff will get the wage they deserve, but I'm also worried about where that money's going to come from and if I can afford it.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Not quite. Doctors and prison officers have already said no to the offer, but with the teachers settling, it has been a better day for him. Robert Paston, News at 10.
The government's 6% increase for NHS doctors in England is to be funded by increasing the amount migrants have to pay to use the NHS. But the Doctors' Union dismissed the offer as a missed opportunity to end the strikes. Thousands more appointments and scheduled treatments will be cancelled over the next few days. Meanwhile, the number of patients in England on the waiting list rose again in May, closer to 7.5 million.
On the picket lines, the anger is palpable.
Sometimes I come home from work and cry.
Times have been difficult and we've all had to step up our game.
I'm currently drawing out of my savings just to be able to pay on my rent this year.
To cope with the longest doctors' strike in NHS history, hospitals are having to prioritise urgent care.
You're right, if I do your blood pressure, it's okay.
This walkout will last until Tuesday. Consultants who go on strike themselves next week are covering, but it's tough in July.
People that would normally cover the strikes are on summer break and are abroad at the moment, which, you know, poses an additional challenge, but so far we're managing to keep things running safely.
Pain-wise, you're okay right now?
The real impact is on non-emergency care. Strikes over the last 8 months have caused 651,000 routine procedures and appointments to be rescheduled. That's contributed to a record 7.47 million people who are now waiting for treatments.
Come on, Max. Try and play with the ball.
Richard is one of those. He's needed a knee op for 2 years. It should have been this morning. Instead, his pain continues.
There's a dispute. That's difficult, but the collateral damage is people like me.
The impasse is over pay. The BMA union want a 35% increase to restore real-term wages. The government had offered a one-off £1,250 payment plus a 5% rise. That's been upped to 6% following the Pay Review Board's recommendation.
Well, this is a fair and final settlement. An increase for some doctors in training of as much as 10.3% reflects the huge value of the work that they do, and it's now time that we move forward.
But back on the picket line, they're aware Scottish doctors have been offered 12.4%.
It would not lead to better retention of doctors in the NHS, and therefore we feel that we have no choice but to keep striking.
So the government's final offer may not be the final act of these disputes. Martin Stew, News at 10.
OK, well, Anushka, as you can see, joins us from Downing Street. Anushka, I mean, I've lost count of the amount of times we've talked about the government warning over and over again that large public sector pay rises will be inflationary. So why have they accepted these recommendations if that's what they think?
Well, first I would say that, yes, the government would call these pay offers large, but the unions and experts I speak to would argue that many of them are below inflation. They would say they are modest. That said, they have gone further than many expected. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. The first, you heard from Rishi Sunak. They are not borrowing to fund these pay rises, so economists tell me they are unlikely to be inflationary, their mantra, as you said. The second, if I just focus on teachers for a minute, is that Downing Street sources tell me they were desperate to stop the teaching strikes, and they believed that teachers wanted to do a deal. There were meetings between figures here and figures at the unions in recent days. It's not been easy. I've heard that there may have been a wobble from the Prime Minister as late as last night, but they have got there. The Education Secretary will be happy today, partly because she's persuaded unions that actually the money is going to come from underspends and not from other parts of the school's budget. But look, a totally different mood, as you've been hearing, among doctors today. Sources in the British Medical Association were pretty upset about this, not because the amount itself doesn't amount to above inflation for at least some doctors. They want a 26% real terms cut over 10 years to be fixed. So this doesn't come close to that. But the thing that has made them really angry was Rishi Sunak saying this is his final offer. They feel that they should still be in the middle of negotiations. That means these strikes will intensify. That means everyone agrees it's going to put pressure, as you were hearing, onto waiting lists. And that is one of Rishi Sunak's key pledges. The one hope they have here in Downing Street is that now that they have offered doctors what the pay review body suggested, they hope people might blame doctors for those waiting lists. I think that's a big gamble. So far, people have tended to point the finger here when there have been problems with the NHS.
OK, Anishka, thank you very much indeed. Now, there was a worrying assessment today of just how many sectors of the British economy have been penetrated by China. According to MPs on Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee, it is in fact all of them. The MPs say our government didn't grasp the threat and respond to it. Their report also criticises the government for risking national security in return for better trade arrangements with China.
Something of a golden era in our relationship. Trade is growing, investment is growing.
What dates this clip is not the tie or the haircut, but the way a British Prime Minister is speaking about China.
Britain and China can work together on some of the global issues.
It was a foreign policy conundrum back then too, but today's report concludes that successive governments answered the China question the wrong way. China has prolifically and aggressively targeted the UK, it says, managing to successfully penetrate every sector of the UK's economy. And yet the government has no strategy to tackle the threat due to its short-termist approach. So keen was the government to take Chinese investment, it has not been watching China's sleight of hand, it says.
It needs to resource more effectively the efforts being made to counter the security threat from China. It needs a whole of government approach.
And if it doesn't do those things?
If it doesn't do those things, there are real dangers in the long term as to China's dominance.
Simon Cheng was granted asylum in Britain after he alleged he was tortured in China. He believes he's a victim now of covert surveillance.
By the way, I think it's already kind of like psychological warfare that's made us to feel even more paranoid and to be harder to trust anyone around us. And that is really an issue.
But the committee says the focus of British intelligence on covert Chinese activity, as well as terrorism, has meant some agencies haven't recognised their role countering overt Chinese interference.
I am keenly aware that there's more to do. This is a serious systemic challenge. This is an issue that the integrated review that the Prime Minister refreshed only a few months ago raises a very serious concern for us all.
The backdrop to all this is the fear that China is preparing to invade Taiwan. The scale of its perceived ambitions are well known, though. The news from today's report is not the Chinese threat, but the apparent inadequacy of the British response. Rohit Khatri, News at 10.
Well, let's talk to Debbie in Beijing about some of this. Debbie, we speak a lot, I guess, about how we see China as a threat. But how does China, in the end, see us here in the UK?
Well, Tom, there is a confidence in the Communist Party under the continued iron grip of Xi Jinping that leads us to believe it doesn't view the UK or any other country as a threat, certainly not in the same terms that were just outlined by Rohit, because in many ways they have made the country so opaque. President Xi has described facing increasingly challenging and complex national security issues, but he's largely talking about more competition and less cooperation from the West. And of course, he sees his biggest source of potential conflict is coming from the United States. The threats that the government works hardest against are Western values, democracy, freedom of speech and capitalism. But just this month, the government here introduced new laws which have widened the scope of what can be deemed a national security violation, making this an even riskier place for foreign companies to operate. The response that we got from the Foreign Ministry to today's response was muted. They described it as false information and hypocritical. But when the UK Foreign Secretary visits Beijing at the end of the month, I expect he will be facing a different tone of discussions from his golden era predecessors.
OK, Debbie, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's come back here now. And the way the BBC has dealt with complaints against its most high-profile news presenter will be played out in Parliament next week. At a pre-arranged hearing, its Director General, Tim Davie, will be asked about the corporation's handling of the suspension of Hugh Edwards. The BBC's acting chairwoman and policy director have also been invited. Hollywood was already in the grip of a strike by its writers. Tonight, it spread to the actors. It is the first time the two groups have taken industrial action together for more than 60 years. It will eventually affect what we see here in cinemas, on television and on streaming services like Netflix. But there was an immediate impact here tonight at the premiere of Oppenheimer, the film we previewed last night.
This was the week when it was expected that major movie releases would mark the rejuvenation of cinema. With blockbusters like Barbie and Oppenheimer hoping to pull in large audiences. Instead, this is the scene in Hollywood, as actors join a strike by scriptwriters, and the whole business model that drives the entertainment industry looks to be in jeopardy, with the studio bosses in the firing line.
The entire business model has been changed by streaming, digital, AI. This is a moment of history. That is a moment of truth. If we don't stand tall right now, we are all going to be in trouble. We are all going to be in jeopardy of being replaced by machines.
Some prominent actors left the London premiere of Oppenheimer early tonight, in solidarity with the strike.
There's an existential threat to, the industry that needs to be addressed. It's being addressed. It's a painful process, but it has to be done.
What we would be striking for if we strike is unbelievably important. We ought to protect the people who are kind of on the margins, and $26,000 a year is what you have to make to get your health insurance, and there are a lot of people who residual payments are what carry them across that threshold, and if those residual payments dry up, so does their health care, and that's absolutely unacceptable.
The great fear among actors and writers alike is that artificial intelligence will provide studios with a cheaper alternative to their creative talents. With scripts written by AI programs and the likeness of actors being cloned on screen.
You're going to see AI used in ways I think none of us can really predict at this point. So the question is, how can we harness it? How can we do it in a way that's fair and that is protecting people with their intellectual property and their image?
What do we want? Fair content! When do we want it? Now!
Hollywood's writers and actors who so enjoy a last-minute twist can see where this particular story is heading, and they are trying to change the ending to ensure their own survival. Robert Moore, News at 10, in the United States.
Well, back in Europe, in many of southern Europe's most popular resorts, holidaymakers are already feeling the heat even before temperature records are broken. That's due to happen in the next couple of days. Mid-40s or higher is on the cards. In places like Torremolinos on Spain's Costa del Sol, hotels are worried that sometime in the future it will be so hot we Brits simply won't want to go on holiday there.
The sun is unrelenting, the heat unforgiving, and the beach for much of the day just about unbearable. More than enough to send dedicated sun worshippers scurrying to find the shade.
It was unbearable. You couldn't even sit in the sunbeds. You're better going inside or sitting in the shade somewhere.
Do you take precautions when it's really hot?
Well, just shade in it and sun cream and hats. That's all you can do, really.
Much of Spain has been under red or yellow alert, suffering with this second unwelcome heat wave of a summer tourist season just getting started. Hard to work indoors without a cooling breeze. This British bar closed when its air conditioning failed. Anne has lived and worked here for 6 years, long enough to see the climate change for the worse.
Came here at 10 o'clock this morning, it was already 90 degrees. It's too hot, and I just think that July and August now for people, the weather's better in the UK, or it has been. They're staying there.
Torremolinos is the cradle of Spain's package tour industry. Sunshine guaranteed, the perfect seaside holiday. They have come in their millions and still do.
This is a town built on tourism, fueled by the sun. But this summer, they're asking an awkward question. How hot is too hot?
Deputy Mayor Marta Huerta tells me they are rethinking their future. She says Torremolinos will market itself as much as a winter as a summer destination. But even those born to these shores worry the heat will one day render the beach effectively out of bounds.
If the temperatures go up too much, it won't be impossible to be here at any time. You know, it's not nice, even for the kids or old people. You know, it's dangerous.
For Spain, a long, hot summer beckons, and it won't always be fun. John Ray, News at 10, Torremolinos.
To Thailand now, where the man who led his party to victory in the general election has failed to become Prime Minister. Peter Limia Ruenrat's reformist Move Forward party, with its pro-democracy agenda, was the big winner back in May. But today, Thailand's unelected Senate, appointed by the outgoing military government, turned down Mr. Limia Ruenrat for the job. He says he's not giving up the fight. The COVID inquiry's attempt to access messages on Boris Johnson's old mobile phone has hit another roadblock. The former Prime Minister says he can't remember the password. Yes, you did hear that right. He's already handed over the WhatsApp messages from his current phone and diaries as requested, but it is the old phone which contains messages from the time of the pandemic. Mr. Johnson's spokesperson said he still wants to cooperate with the inquiry. Now, the film star Kevin Spacey has insisted the encounters he had with the four men accusing him of sexual assault were actually romantic or consensual or did not happen. He took centre stage at his trial in London and began his evidence by describing himself as a big flirt. The Oscar-winning actor became tearful when asked about the allegations and how they'd affected him. He said he'd lost his job, his reputation, everything, in fact, in a matter of days.
As an actor, he's used to drama, but today Kevin Spacey appeared on a different kind of stage, taking the stand in court to challenge his accusers. The Oscar winner, who's most recently known for his role in the series House of Cards, described his encounters with his alleged four victims as relaxed or consensual, and in one case, completely made up. In court, Spacey denied claims he drugged a young actor and performed a sex act on him while he was asleep, saying the pair had shared an intimate moment. He was asked about claims he'd grabbed another alleged victim so hard in the groin while he was driving that he nearly crashed the car. Spacey told the jury their relationship had been respectful and, in his mind, romantic.
It did not happen in a violent, aggressive or painful way, he said. It was not what he described. The lawyer then asked what he thought when he was charged with sexual assault in 2022. He replied, "I was crushed. I never thought the man I knew 20 years ago would stab me in the back."
Spacey had come to London in the early 2000s to revitalise the Old Vic Theatre, the court was told. Describing his time as artistic director there, Spacey said he socialised and worked with big names like Elton John and Dame Judi Dench. When asked how allegations against him had impacted his life, he became emotional, telling the court there was a rush to judgment. And before the first question was asked or answered, "I lost my job, I lost my reputation, I lost everything in a matter of days." The 63-year-old denies all 12 charges against him and will continue his evidence tomorrow. Carolyn Sim, News at 10, Southwark Crown Court.
Along the picturesque east coast of Scotland, we have seen the hideous sight of huge numbers of seabirds washing up on its beaches. They number in their hundreds. An outbreak of bird flu appears to be spreading. Testing has begun to see if it is a new, more deadly strain.
Scattered amongst the seaweed, dead birds litter this otherwise scenic beach.
It's a shocking sight, but one that's replicated along Scotland's east coast. It's believed they've died from avian flu. But testing is underway to see if that's what's hit seabird colonies during peak breeding season.
We'll be taking the first swab from the mouth, so I'll be gently opening the bill and putting the swab inside. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what these results come back as. This bird is very, very thin.
This is the reality of Scottish beaches in the northeast this summer. On one side, families out playing in the sand, but just metres away, reserve managers are testing the dead birds which are washing up on their shores. And it's causing upset for those enjoying the Scottish school holidays.
Well, apart from a bit of worries, with children playing with feathers and stuff like that, no, not really affecting us. It's just sad.
It's just heartbreaking.
Aberdeenshire Council has collected more than 1,000 dead birds this week, and there's concern about the rising cases in gulls.
There are species that will move from both seabirds to inland and potentially could spread the virus further as a result.
Experts say avian flu is the last thing seabirds need right now.
They're under so much pressure with climate change and food shortages and prolonged bad weather, that having avian flu hitting their population, it's a disaster really.
It's hoped results of recent tests will soon give clarity as to why so many dead birds are washing up on our shores this summer. Louise Scott, News at 10, Aberdeenshire.
Some sports, and there won't, after all, be a Ukrainian women's champion at Wimbledon. The winning streak of the unseeded outsider Elina Svitolina was brought to an end. She was beaten by the Czech player Markéta Vondrousova in 2 sets. But that other centre court favourite, Ons Jabeur, won her semi-final. The Tunisian 6th seed put out Belarusia's Anya Sabalenka. Go marching on, one might say, to her 2nd Wimbledon final in a row. Finally, perhaps it is something we are going to have to get used to in the new era of artificial intelligence, not being able to believe our eyes. When judges in a photography competition were shown a photo taken by a woman of her son, they thought it was so well composed, so colourful and so different, it must have been the work of AI. It wasn't, in fact, but that didn't stop them disqualifying it on the grounds that AI is not okay.
2 of the people in this photograph clearly aren't real. But is the whole thing a fake? That was the conclusion of 4 judges in an Australian photography competition. They were wrong, but does the incident spell problems for the art world? This was the Gucci exhibit where Australian actor Susie Docherty snapped her son Casper, pretending to be one of the mannequins. Susie's mother thought it was so good she should enter it in a competition. But a few days later, the organisers ruled it out, writing on Instagram, "There is no way we can be completely sure the image submitted was made by AI, but you really can't ignore the gut instincts of 4 judges." The frenetic pace of AI development has rung alarm bells over recent months. All of these images have been created using it, sparking confusion as to whether the scenes depicted were real. In the art world, there are concerns, but there's also excitement about the possibilities for its use.
The photography world has to go through a process to try and ascertain what to do with this. But I think a lot of artists are actually very excited with AI, with these new programmatic machines, and they're going to see it as a sort of liberating tool.
In April, German artist Boris L. Dagson revealed he wouldn't be collecting his prize at the Sony World Photography Awards for this photo, because he had used AI purposefully to start a debate about how the art world was unprepared for its ramifications. Photographer Jude Wax agrees there are a lot of issues to be worked out.
I think it ultimately it's here to stay, and like it or not, it has to be accepted. I think it has its place. It will have its place increasingly, and we just all have to find a way to adapt to it.
So if you're planning to enter competitive photography, the advice is be ready to submit the evidence to prove the eye can believe what you've captured. Vincent McAviney, News at 10.
Let's face it, it's going to get very, very complicated. That's it. See you tomorrow. Good night. Thank you for watching.